We are not only less reasonable and less decent than we suppose ourselves to be, that is something easily seen. We are also in a substantial degree less rational and less ethical than we believe ourselves to be. Robert Wright. The famous French author Marcel Proust wrote in his novel In Search of Lost Time, "We imagine always when we speak that it is our own ears, our own mind, that are listening. Unhappily, it is not. Words have their own way of traveling." With this quote, Proust highlights a key insight about self-knowledge. There is much more going on inside our minds than we are consciously aware of. We often assume we know ourselves intimately, that we have direct access to our inner thoughts, feelings, and motivations. But what if a significant part of who we are remains hidden from our conscious minds? What if the person we think we know best, ourselves, is in many ways a stranger? In his fascinating book Strangers to Ourselves, social psychologist Timothy D. Wilson argues exactly that. We actually know shockingly little about our own minds. A powerful adaptive unconscious quietly directs much of our behavior, judgments, and emotional responses without our awareness. This leads to a kind of terrible paradox. The one person we assume we should have the most insight into, ourselves, is in many ways deeply enigmatic and inscrutable. The illusion of introspection. For most of us, it feels intuitively obvious that we have excellent insight into our own minds. After all, we spend every waking moment with ourselves. Who could possibly know us better than we do? When we introspect and examine our conscious thoughts and feelings, it seems like we're getting a direct, unfiltered view into the inner workings of our psyche. If someone asks us why we decided on a particular course of action or felt a certain way, we can usually provide a plausible-sounding reason without much hesitation. But according to Wilson, this sense of privileged access and self-insight is often a compelling illusion. A tremendous amount of research in psychology has demonstrated that our conscious explanations for our own behavior are frequently inaccurate. We are quite skilled at inventing post hoc stories to rationalize our actions and feelings. But the real reasons often lie in mental processes that are opaque to conscious awareness. In one famous study, researchers set up a display table with 4 identical pairs of nylon stockings and asked passerby shoppers to choose the pair they preferred. Participants provided all sorts of compelling reasons for their decision, like the superior knit, sheerness, or elasticity of their chosen pair. But in reality, the position of the stockings on the table heavily influenced people's preference. They consistently favored the rightmost pair. When asked, though, not a single person mentioned position as a factor in their choice. They were convinced their preference was based solely on the qualities of the stockings, not realizing how an unconscious positional bias shaped their decision. Examples like this revealed the surprising power of the unconscious to guide behavior behind the scenes. Our minds are churning away, making judgments and initiating actions, while our conscious thoughts skip merrily along the surface, none the wiser. Then, when asked to explain ourselves, our rational brains quickly throw together a plausible-sounding narrative to explain what just happened. And because this story is the only information consciously available to us, we believe it unreservedly. From the inside, our choices seem driven by clear, conscious reasons. But much of the real action happens in an inaccessible shadowland. Like a president oblivious that his decisions are being subtly manipulated by advisors and interest groups, we are often blind to the influence of our adaptive unconscious. We are, in a very real sense, strangers to ourselves. The adaptive unconscious. So what is this adaptive unconscious that has so much power over our minds? It is essentially a collection of mental processes that handle vast amounts of information quickly and efficiently, learning from past experiences and guiding our current behavior and decision-making. All of this happens automatically, without any need for conscious awareness or control. The non-conscious mind is like an overclocked supercomputer running in the background, while the conscious mind is like a regular desktop PCI. The sheer processing power and speed of the unconscious is staggering. It can handle about 11 million pieces of information per second, while the conscious mind can only process about 40. That means the unconscious has hundreds of thousands of times more bandwidth. This tremendous computing power allows the adaptive unconscious to carry out all sorts of complex operations very rapidly. It can evaluate people's facial expressions to read their emotions, size up the physical environment to navigate through space, parse language to extract meaning, and guide the body to carry out sophisticated physical actions, all while barely making a dent in conscious attention. Consider an everyday example, when you're driving down a familiar highway while engaged in a heated discussion with your friend in the passenger seat. Your conscious mind is fully absorbed in the conversation, yet you manage to operate the vehicle flawlessly, staying in your lane, maintaining the proper speed and following all relevant traffic laws. That's because your adaptive unconscious is handling all of the complicated logistics of driving without you having to think about it consciously. Or take a social example. Within seconds of meeting a new person, your adaptive unconscious has already made a slew of judgments. Are they trustworthy? Competent? Attractive? A potential threat or ally? It scours their facial expressions, body language, clothing, and speech patterns for clues to reach a verdict, and you feel a resulting gut sense of positivity or negativity towards them. All this happens automatically, before your conscious mind even has a chance to form a clear impression. The interpreter. So, if the adaptive unconscious is so great at handling information and making decisions, what role does conscious thought play in the mind? According to Wilson, the conscious mind often functions more like an interpreter than a wise leader in charge of everything. The interpreter takes in the outputs of the adaptive unconscious, our gut feelings, intuitions, and snap judgments, and tries to make sense of them. It weaves the mind's behind-the-scenes machinations into a plausible story that paints a flattering picture of the self. We have a powerful drive to see ourselves as consistent, rational, and good, and the interpreter works overtime to maintain that fiction. The problem is, this story is often out of sync with reality, because the interpreter doesn't have all the facts. It's not privy to the complex workings of the adaptive unconscious. So it takes whatever limited information it has conscious access to, and spins that into an egocentric narrative that preserves our self-image. Like a president with limited information trying to figure out what his intelligence agencies are up to, the interpreter is often playing catch-up, doing damage control, putting out PR fires. Meanwhile, the real power is happening elsewhere, behind closed doors. The conscious justifications we offer for our actions are often more like hasty rationalizations than deep insights. The illusion of control. All of this leads to a rather unsettling conclusion. Much of the time, we are not consciously controlling our behavior and decisions to the degree we imagine we are. The adaptive unconscious is the real puppet master, while conscious thought is more like a commentator, trying to make sense of the show. This realization can be quite a blow to our egos. We like to see ourselves as the masters of our own destinies, the authors of our own life stories. To recognize how profoundly our minds are influenced by factors outside of our awareness or control is disquieting, to put it mildly. But the evidence is clear. In study after study, researchers have shown how our judgments and decisions can be biased by subtle cues we're not even aware of. Things like the cleanliness of the room we're in, the race or attractiveness of a face we see flash by on a screen, or whether we just ate a tasty snack or not. All these irrelevant factors can shift our preferences and actions dramatically without us realizing it. Even our most heartfelt values and aspirations may be less consciously chosen than we imagine. Wilson cites a study where researchers stopped students on a college campus and asked them about their views on affirmative action in a way designed to make most of them voice strong opposition. Then, half the students were asked to explain why they held that view. Later on, all the participants read more information about affirmative action. The ones who didn't have to explain their views were more likely to shift their opinions in light of what they learned. In contrast, the students who articulated a detailed justification for their position tended to get locked in. Having stated clear reasons for their belief, they felt compelled to stand by it even when presented with compelling counter-arguments. Examples like this reveal the potential folly of assuming we arrive at our most cherished ideas through a purely rational, intentional process. Once we latch onto a belief and weave it into a self-narrative, we tend to get stuck, ignoring contrary evidence in order to maintain a sense of consistency. The very act of explaining ourselves can lead us to crystallize a viewpoint prematurely, closing us off to other perspectives. All of this might seem to paint a rather dark picture of human nature, that we are deluded creatures, forever blind to our true selves and beholden to unconscious puppeteers we can't fully control. But I think that's the wrong way to look at it. Recognizing the limits of conscious awareness is not admitting defeat. It's the first step towards a clearer, more accurate sense of how our minds really work. The power of self-observation. So how can we start to peel back the curtain on our adaptive unconscious and gain more insight into the hidden springs of our thoughts and actions? The key, according to Wilson, is turning our powers of observation outwards, not just inwards. When we examine our own behavior from a third-person perspective, we can start to notice patterns that reveal our implicit dispositions and motivations. If we repeatedly find ourselves procrastinating on important projects, for instance, that's a clue that we may have some unconscious fears or doubts to grapple with, even if we can't yet articulate them clearly. Similarly, paying attention to how other people perceive and react to us can be a surprisingly insightful window into our own psyches. Our friends, family, and coworkers often see sides of us that we're blind to. They can pick up on our unconscious habits, biases, and defense mechanisms even when we're ignorant of them ourselves. Getting feedback from trusted outside observers can be a revelation. Of course, this doesn't mean just blindly accepting other people's opinions of us. Their perceptions can certainly be biased or misinformed too. But if we notice consistent themes in how others tend to describe us, things that don't necessarily match up with our self-image, that's a strong clue there may be parts of our personality we're not consciously attuned to. Another powerful tool for self-insight is noticing what makes us emotional. Our feelings arise from the adaptive unconscious, not the conscious mind. So when we have a strong affective response to something, whether it's a flush of pride, a twinge of guilt, or a surge of attraction, that's often a sign of something psychologically meaningful under the surface. Here too, we need to be willing to question and look beyond our immediate, rational explanations for feelings. Identifying accurate reasons for emotions is surprisingly difficult. But by being curious about our reactions and sitting with them non-judgmentally, we can start to detect deeper layers of motivation and meaning. All of these techniques have a key thing in common. They require us to loosen our grip on our existing consciously constructed identities. We have to be willing to let go of cherished narratives about who we are and what we're like, when the evidence doesn't support them. We must continually hold our theories about ourselves lightly, and stand ready to revise them based on new data. This is an endless, iterative process. There is no moment of ultimate self-insight where we suddenly see ourselves with perfect clarity and resolve all the contradictions and mysteries of our psyches. The best we can do is commit to being lifelong students of our own unfathomably complex natures. We will always remain partial strangers to ourselves, but we can become increasingly friendly and familiar ones over time. The upshot. At first glance, the notion that our behaviors, thoughts, and feelings are profoundly shaped by an adaptive unconscious we have little direct access to can seem incredibly disempowering, almost nihilistic. Does it mean all our conscious efforts at self-control and self-improvement are doomed? That free will is an illusion, and we are forever at the mercy of unseen internal forces. I don't think so. While we may never have the kind of perfectly transparent self-knowledge and absolute self-mastery we like to imagine, we are far from powerless either. By learning more about the hidden workings of our own psyches, we can absolutely make positive changes and move in directions we value. We will never have total control over every fleeting thought and impulse that pops into our heads. But we can notice larger patterns and nudge our automatic minds in better directions over time, through deliberate practice and habit formation. No, we cannot find some true self that was there all along, just waiting to be uncovered. But we can consciously construct more accurate, more empowering stories about who we are and what we want, and then live our way into them. Ultimately, I believe the key insight from modern research into the adaptive unconscious is a powerful invitation to humility and curiosity. We must humbly accept that our conscious minds are not the omniscient rulers we take them to be, while remaining curious to discover more about the unseen forces that move us. We are all like explorers in an inner wilderness, a wilderness we can never fully map, but whose contours and patterns we can discern more clearly over time, as long as we retain our sense of wonder. There will always be more to learn about the strangers to ourselves. The quest for self-knowledge is the ongoing adventure of a lifetime. Thank you for watching.